Society, we have to get one thing out of the way, which is, can you hear me?
Oh my God. Thank you. I can't work out whether that's the best moment of my life or the most excruciating moment of my life. It's somewhere in between.
Should we do it again so you'll find
Thank
out? Are these mics loud enough? Not really. Can you turn up the mics, Hunter? Let's see if that's better. Let me start with a question for you, Felicity. You took the character Jane, who could have easily blended in with the wallpaper and been a dutiful wife and mother, and made it an incredibly complex performance. And I'm thinking, for example, of the tension between her religious faith and her sexual desire. And I wondered how much the role evolved from the moment it was written on the page and you read it to the performance you gave on screen. Were you able to do much with the words? Were you able to change the words? Were you able to improvise?
Well, thank you. That's very kind, and hello, everyone. It felt like on the page, when I read it, I was very pleased that she was a complicated character. It was all there in that first reading. You know, it was for both of us. What was great about it is it's a love story in many ways, and it wasn't a straightforward biopic, and that's what really appealed in the first place. But we were really lucky that James Marsh is incredibly collaborative, and he's very skilled in that he gives you the freedom to really own a part, to take hold of it and bring as many ideas as possible. And he has this ability to make you want to please the character and not be pleasing him, which I think is a really magical thing for a director to do, because it's not about his ego, it's about telling the story. So from the very beginning, when we all met in Copenhagen, where James lives, and it was a very open conversation just about, okay, what do you guys, here's the script as a template, and what do you want to bring to it? So it was always a dialogue with Anthony McCartan as well to bring extra layers to it, absolutely. And once having met Jane and Stephen, there was so much more in meeting them that we wanted to bring to the script. So it was an ever-changing, malleable document, absolutely.
So, and James Marsh has a documentary background, and I'm wondering, you know, he made Man on a Wire, for example, a wonderful portrait of Philippe Petit, and I'm wondering whether he brought a certain kind of documentary sensibility to the production in any way.
I think firstly, one of the things that really appealed to me when I read the script, as Felicity said, you thought it was going to be one thing, and when you read it, it subverted all of those expectations. And similarly, the idea of James directing it, I thought Man on Wire was an extraordinary film. And again, you thought it was going to be about one thing, and it subverted that. And so for me, it was just too intoxicating a mixture that it really, of the subject matter and the director. But James has an extraordinary documentary background, and one of the things that he allowed Felicity and I time, which is kind of rare on films. We had 4 months from when we were cast to when we started filming, and we went and did our own research and went and met specialists and people suffering from ALS and their families, and wanted to do all of this work on the technical elements of both of our performances, in order that when we came to play together, we could just play the human story. Because what Anthony had written, well, firstly, for Stephen, the disease and the physicality couldn't be less important. He's someone that lives forward and lives incredibly passionately, and we wanted to make sure that this was a story, when it came to playing it every day on set, that was about an emotional connection rather than playing a disease or playing the care or playing the physicality.
Well, one of the unusual things in a studio production is if you can shoot a film in chronological order, in the sequence in which the script is written. And I'm wondering if you had that opportunity in this production, or if you had to shoot it out of sequence, in which case I imagine it was extraordinarily difficult for you to try to recall at what point in his physical degradation you had to perform.
I think James tried for a moment to see if we could be able to shoot it chronologically, but as you said, it's so complicated financially now to make films chronologically. So we knew pretty much from the outset that that wasn't going to be the case, and so that affected our preparation. Within the same day, Felicity and I would be playing Jane and Stephen at different ages within the 25 years, and so that time that he gave us was essential for us to be able. We kind of ended up learning it almost like dance. We learnt the specifics of the physicalities, but also the interactions, because it's almost like the carer becomes an extension of the body of the patient, and there's a beautiful moment in a documentary with Stephen and Jane when Stephen's in the garden in his chair, and Jane's having a conversation with someone, and at that point he's lost the control of his neck muscle, and his neck just falls, and Jane's not even looking in that direction, and there's something in her sixth sense that just gently places his head up and continues talking. And with regards to James as a documentarian, we wanted to have that fluency between us at each of the stages of the physicality, so that when we came, we could improvise for him. And as Felicity was saying, the script was fluid in that way.
And one of the things that's striking to me, even watching it again, is how it moves from a verbal to a physical performance. I mean, for both of you, in a sense, that the gestures and the expressions convey as much as the words. And of course, with Hawking, it's inevitable. But even with your performance, I think so much is revealed in a look and in a gesture, and not in necessarily what you're saying.
Well, and actually, I have to say, so much of that detail was rooted in the way that Benoit Delhomme, the DOP, the way he shot it. We actually were lucky enough to watch rushes in the first week of shooting, and it's really helpful. We both similarly find it helpful to see the kind of film you're in and know what you're dealing with. And in that week, you could see that Benoit was capturing all this detail, foot movements and very specific hand moments, and I think the intensity of the camera work allowed us to really find that detail, find the nuance, and what's really enjoyable as an actor to play is always when somebody's saying something but what they're thinking is completely different, and it's probably something that English people are particularly good at. So it was. I think it was. We were allowed to have this stage in a way to find all this detail.
Do you want to add anything to that?
No, I think the other thing that was amazing about it was this specific story being told on film. It was one of the things that I found most intriguing about the process was that when Stephen is unable to move the most. One would think that that's static, but actually, weirdly, it was the most energy-consuming part of the film, because you're not gently relaxed. You're actually in incredibly contorted and extreme positions, and we're all told as actors when we start out, camera sees everything. You do very little. And what I found weird about this film was actually you were doing the most extreme things you've ever done on screen, and hoping that you were never taking it too far. But the wonderful thing about playing Stephen on film is that the camera does see everything. And so the smallest of things, and particularly I always think in the scene with the trans board, the scene when he's just had the tracheostomy and Jane comes and tries to communicate with him, that through that sort of transparent thing, it's really in the minutiae of what's going on between these two people.
And by the way, I dutifully read Brief History of Time, and I saw the Errol Morris movie with the flying chickens and the spinning watches, and I still, for the life of me, cannot tell you what a black hole is. So I know you went to Cambridge, I know you went to Oxford, and I'm wondering if you can give me a chance by explaining it to me. Given those 4 months of research, did that actually pay off?
Well, this is what most of the filming would be because Eddie, James and I all studied art subjects at university, so it would be really embarrassing, the three of us trying to explain what black holes were to each other, and it was always completely disastrous, and then we'd think, well, we'll come back to it later, and then we never quite came back to it. Yes.
I wanted also to ask you, you were talking about the research, and I want to ask each of you actually about the research period, because you mentioned you had met Jane, of course, and you, I don't know at what point you met Stephen Hawking, but I know you met with ALS, people who are suffering from ALS, and I wonder if you could talk about that period of those 4 months.
Well, it started from just after we were cast. The next day I went to an ALS clinic, a neurology clinic in London, and met with a specialist there and her clinical nurse. And basically over the next 4 months, Felicity and I would go to the clinic where people suffering from ALS would come, and after their session with Dr. Siegel, she would go, look, there are these actors playing Jane and Stephen, would you be interested in meeting them? And across the board, they were sensationally generous with not only their time, but also some of them invited us into their homes. And it wasn't just about educating yourself on the physical, but also the emotional ramifications and the cost. But what was interesting is there's a lot of documentary material of Stephen, but from the 80s, from when he was in the wheelchair. And so what was the more challenging part was working out what his specific physical decline to the chair would have been. And with motor neuron disease or ALS, you have what are called upper neurons and lower neurons. And when your upper neurons stop working, there is a kind of rigid quality. And when the lower ones stop, there is a kind of wilting. And ALS is a combination of those two things, but how it manifests itself in each patient is unique. So basically working out Stephen's decline, I would find as many photographs as possible and show them to the specialist who would, and there's one particular example of Stephen and Jane on their wedding day, and Stephen's holding Jane's hand, and at a glance it looks like a normal photo, but you then see that actually all of his weight is on her, his hand is on top, and he has a softness in his hand. And so the specialist would go, okay, so from that date, he's got lower neuron in his right hand. And so through dissecting these photos, you would work out what muscle went when. And that, I then worked with a dancer who helped train my body to be able to sustain some of the positions and for extended periods. And for, both of us actually worked with movement people to be able to jump into those specific physicalities and different physicalities within the same day.
And did you speak with the families who had to endure the pressures of caring for people who are suffering from ALS? Because that's also what I think is really interesting, not just the physical aspects, which are fascinating, but also because you said this is a love story, you know, the impossible situation that they find themselves in.
Well, absolutely, and it was such a huge responsibility actually with not only playing real people, but presenting a disease that people don't know a lot about. It is not widely known exactly what it is. Obviously, with the Ice Bucket Challenge, there's been a lot more awareness. But we found, because we met these extraordinary individuals who were going through it, and actually, without them, it would have been really hard because they let us into their homes, actually. And there was an extraordinary woman who I spent some time with, just being with her, and her husband has ALS, motor neuron disease, and just, you know, she was so open about the complications of that, because it's difficult. Your relationship changes. You know, you go from being husband and wife to carer and to nurse and patient, and navigating that is very tricky. So it was having the openness of these people which really helped to find that the nuance of that interaction.
There was one moment in a little documentary that I saw in which this couple, the guy has MND, and his wife is being interviewed, and he's quite far on, he's not really able to move, and his wife is being asked, you know, what is the worst thing about your husband having motor neuron disease? And she goes, do you know what? I do not know where to start. And she's kind of quite upbeat, and out of nowhere, she suddenly breaks down. And it's extraordinary because he's there, and he's trying to comfort her, but he can't move to comfort her. So even though she's breaking down, she has to come over to him to hold him for comfort. And it lasts about 40 seconds, this piece of documentary, but it is profoundly moving. And for us, or for me, that felt like if, you know, in 2 hours of film or an hour and a half, we could get close to capturing that. And it was actually, I don't think even Felicity, I saw it sort of midway through, but there was an amazing moment when we were doing the scene in which they part ways, and I was sort of snotty and crying, and even though Stephen's pulled away from Jane, at that moment, spontaneously, Felicity wiped my nose, or, you know, and for me, that was a moment of trying to capture those things which were very specific to what we had observed.
Well, it becomes absolute codependency. You know, they become like one person, and so that's what was so harrowing in playing that scene. Is Jane and Stephen, they can't imagine life without the other person. And actually, it was interesting. I remember thinking when Jane gives Stephen the clicker for the machine, it's almost like she knows that she's giving him his freedom in a way, because he's now got the ability to communicate without her in many ways. So it was interesting with actors, you're always obsessed with how people communicate. And Jane and Stephen were having to find all these different ways of maintaining communication with each other.
But I also think that rather than sanctify the two of them, you actually show them as deeply ambivalent people in a relationship that is evolving, but you do so in a way that's non-judgmental, which is, I think, a very hard thing to pull off.
Definitely, when we wanted reading about these people and meeting them and meeting their friends, they are human beings and they are incredibly three-dimensional and complicated, brilliant, funny people, and it was absolutely important that we showed them in all their colours, whilst at the same time, for me, and it was actually in Anthony's script, the lack of judgment. It's the idea of leaving this film going, what would you do in these circumstances? And what it meant was when we were shooting, Felicity and Charlie Cox, who plays Jonathan, and Maxine Peake, who plays Elaine, we were all incredibly fiercely protective of our characters, and we would sort of fight to the core to make sure that balance was there.
Yeah, I think that's what James was so good at doing. You know, we became sort of so fierce. That you were like, no, this is how Jane would see this situation. And then you'd be like, no, Stephen, it's like that, you know, this sort of. So we did. It was this incredible sort of vehemence that we had about them. And it actually took a few months. I remember after finishing filming, I was like, oh, I'm finally remembering who I am again. You know, that person sort of disappears for that time, and you just become so hot-headed about them.
You both have very well-established careers on stage as well, and in experimental or more adventuresome companies like the Dunbar Warehouse. And I'm wondering whether it sounds like you were able to bring a certain spontaneity to this production, but I'm wondering if that's actually a rarity for film. Is it hard for you to be able to bring that kind of spontaneity to the films that you perform in?
I think it's all about who you're working with, and what was amazing about James was that he allowed us this freedom. Everything in this film affected everything else. So anything that either of us were doing physically, if it was not costumed correctly, it wouldn't expose what was correct, and that would have ramifications on the makeup. And if it was shot from the wrong angle, or for example, because Stephen loses weight throughout the disease, but we weren't shooting chronologically, we had to find a way of, in the same day, being able to show him losing weight, but that involved proportion, so it would involve some of the wheelchairs being oversized, or Benoit shooting from specific angles. Now, James did this thing, which is he absolutely emboldened every department, and including the actors, to have a voice, and that for me, that said, the word collaboration, which is one that I sort of throw around a lot, but it really did feel true in this case. We felt that he gave us the freedom to fail, and if it didn't work, rather than going, we've really got to move on, you know, he was like, no, try again, and keep trying, and it did feel rare.
Yeah, I think it's absolutely. I think it is really difficult to maintain that spontaneity, and it's that thing that I think a director said, you know, when someone's watching the film, they don't care how it was made, they just care about the emotions on the screen and whether they're believable. And I really felt like that James stuck to that he would, you know, say, you'd be doing the scene and you'd be doing the lines, and then it'd be just, I mean, there was one scene, it was so bad, it was like the most theatrical thing either of us had ever done, you know, it's sort of just not working at all.
Schmacting.
Yeah, total schmacting. And James was just like, you know, just don't feel like you have to say any of the words. Just feel that freedom to just try something completely new. And I think that's something I would hope to always take forward. That there are no rules actually. All that matters is that there's a connection between two people on screen, and use whatever methods you can to get there.
Does either of you have a wish to become a director?
Good question.
It's funny that thing because I feel like it's such directing is it's a very different skill set, and it must be such an exhausting process to bring your passion and your vision to the screen with so many other voices involved. So I mean, it's something that I wouldn't rule out, but at the moment I feel like the acting sort of there's enough to be doing with that at the moment.
Exactly what she said.
So I'll be patient. Maybe we can take a couple questions from the audience. Anyone have a question? And actually, we have a mic going around if you don't mind waiting a second so you can speak into the mic. Right here. Do we have a mic going around? It's worth repeating that in case you didn't hear. She hopes that you both win the Academy Award.
Thank you.
Yes, right in the front.
To Eddie, I just want to know, you said you worked with a dancer to get the body contortions correct, but after you were in those positions, did you have to do anything to kind of work your body out? Did you get, like, cramped up when you were doing those things?
The question was just about Eddie's work with a dancer and whether it was hard to undo the contortions in which he had to put himself during the shoot.
Part of working with Alex, this dancer, was in those 4 months beforehand, was learning to train your muscles to be able to sustain those positions. And what was interesting, it did feel like being an athlete. It was about learning to shorten muscles rather than to sort of extend them. And she sent me to a very brilliant osteopath who from day one sort of started mapping my body through the rehearsal process and then into filming. And I'll never forget, about halfway through filming, he was like, God, it's really interesting what's happening to your spine. Like, I think I'm gonna, he's like, I think I'm gonna write an essay on you. And I was like, that is not what you want to hear from your osteopath. What you want to hear from your osteopath is you are normal. So no, there were occasional moments of emergency sort of acupuncture, but what was it? Actually, I came out entirely unscathed until I got on a flight over here the other day and I cracked my neck and I basically can't now move my neck. So a year on, maybe it's having an effect.
Does either of you have a dancing background? Did you ever do any
I
dance?
certainly don't. No,
Definitely
I'm
not.
a useless dancer.
Late at night, very drunken, maybe.
It's the best kind. Yes.
Did Hawking and Jane see the film, and if so, what did they think, or any of the other?
What did Stephen and Jane think of the film?
Felicity and I, when we took on this film, it was this extraordinary mixture of like phenomenal privilege and great responsibility. And basically we knew at some point, they let us into their lives in the process, and the whole family and Jonathan, and we knew that eventually they'd see the film. And it's what made the stakes so high, is that you knew that the people whose lives you were telling were ultimately going to review it. I'll never forget, I was rehearsing for a new film the morning that Stephen came to see it, and I saw him just before he went in, and I said, look, Stephen, I'm incredibly nervous, but do let me know what you think. And Stephen now just uses this muscle beneath his eye. He has glasses with a sensor, and on the screen he has the alphabet with a cursor that goes across the alphabet, and when he moves this muscle, it stops on one letter. So when you're having a live conversation, it really does take a long, long time for him to respond, 8 minutes, 9, and so there's a very unique rhythm. And so after I said, look, I'm very nervous, but let me know what you think, he took about 6 or 7 minutes, and then he responded, and his response was, I will let you know what I think, good or otherwise. And I shat myself, and then said, thank you, Stephen. If it's otherwise, maybe just say otherwise. Maybe we don't need to go into all the details. But fortunately, he was incredibly generous. And the most wonderful thing for us was that he owns the copyright to his voice, the iconic voice that we know. And when we had made the film, we had used our kind of own approximated, synthesized version of that voice. And after he saw the film, he offered us his voice. So the voice that you hear in the film is his, and for us that was just amazing.
It's amazing to think you can copyright a voice.
Yeah.
It's just striking. Anyone? A couple more questions. Yes, in the middle, in the center.
Hi.
Hi.
I've seen both of you do Shakespeare. I guess I heard Richard II
That's a great question.
Great. It's really hard working with older texts. That's what I would say straight off. Gosh, that's a really good question.
I don't know. Sorry.
No, go on. Shoot
I don't know about the specific text, but one of the things I did find helpful, like I went into doing Richard II kind of blindly, and only as I was sort of rehearsing, or as it started being reviewed, did I realize that basically this canon of extraordinary other actors have played the part, and it comes with a lot of preconceptions. And that did have an effect on what you were doing, and sort of galvanizing yourself to not feel, to find something new, even though other people have done it. I mean, it wasn't so much that other people have played Stephen Hawking, but it was more the fact that everyone has an opinion on him and what he's going to be, and realizing you just can't please everyone, and that you have to do your own take on it. That was something that I sort of related to the Shakespeare play.
Yeah, I mean, I found it really daunting. I found it doing Shakespeare on screen I did find it particularly challenging. And I think always it's the same with whatever you're doing. It doesn't matter when it is. I think human emotions are the same and will always be the same. You know, they're just expressed in different ways. So whatever I'm doing, it's just trying to find the reality of the situation. You know, what is that person feeling? Are they in love? Are they, you know, are they trying to get something from someone? So no matter what the words are, or whether they're very poetic or just very straightforward, just always find that, what is that natural human impulse underneath them?
Did you find it more daunting on screen than on stage?
I did actually, but it's that thing, it's sort of that feeling that you have that you know, if you're doing screen, then don't overact. You know, I think it's come from the sort of Marlon Brando school of thought that you're like, just be, you know, you've just got to keep everything down. And so you sort of go in thinking, I just don't want this to be some sort of overacted disaster. But actually, so yes, yeah, in answer to your question, I'm just babbling on, but on answer to your question, I did find it more difficult.
One last thing, though, is faith in the words. When it's a text that has been done again and again and again, if you can't make it live, you kind of know it's your fault. Does that make sense? So, oh, that's Shakespeare, dude. He needs to go and like sort some stuff out, you know. But what can happen often on film is because you're not necessarily as rigorous with the text as a group of people, because you tend to not have so much rehearsal. What can happen on film sets is you can try and make it sound real on the day, and it doesn't sound real, and you're then given free rein just to kind of change it, because you've only got those few hours to capture it and make it sound real. And quite often people go, if you've ever been scarred as an actor by people going, that was really badly acted, rather than going, no, those words were quite difficult to make sound real, it's quite easy to just go, I'm going to take the easy option and just shift that word or change that. But having faith in really good writing is perhaps what you glean from doing the Shakespeare.
Time for one more. How about right there?
Did you have a chance to meet the children, and did they express any feelings about their views of their parents' relationship?
Did Eddie and Felicity meet the children, and if so, what sort of response did they have to the film?
Well, it was brilliant meeting them, because we were both, you know, we were coming at it from this very reverential perspective. You know, we wanted to do the story justice and had, you know, very nervous about it. And actually, what was great was to talk to Tim, who was just brilliant, and Lucy as well, actually. Their eldest child, Robert, wasn't around. He lives in the States, actually. But Tim was brilliant, because he would say to us, oh, you know, when I was younger, I used to put swear words in Dad's voice box, and I would just ride on the side of his wheelchair, you know, because I could get to places quicker, you know, that kind of thing. Which we just were like, great, that's that kind of detail, that humor, and that reality of people dealing with the situation was just brilliant, because we could kind of put that into the film.
So lovely about the film, but they had two criticisms which were absolutely hilarious. One of them was that their elder brother, so Lucy and Tim, saw it together, and they were like, we loved it, it was great. One thing that made them like belly laugh was the idea of Robert, their brother, playing the piano. That was like genuinely hysterical to them, because they were like, that would never happen. And the second thing was that last scene where you see them after Buckingham Palace and they're grown up, and And Lucy was like, so, you remember she's wearing that pinafore, that kind of sort of sailor's outfit almost. She goes, and she writes in this email, she goes, I love it, it was great. I like to think I was slightly more punk rock.
I want to end just with a plea that both of you will very soon end up on the New York stage. You, Eddie, back on the New York stage. I really hope you'll do something here in New York. And thank you for coming on your birthday to MoMA, and thank you both for being here.
Thanks for
Thank
having
you
me.
so much. Thank you.